Okay, in this explainer, we are going to talk about that feeling of being constantly switched on. We're going to look at the actual science behind your brain's stress switch, and then find a super simple, really powerful way to finally turn it off.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You're supposed to be relaxing, but your mind is just running. It's going over to-do lists, all your worries. It can really feel like you're failing when you just can't unwind. But here's the thing, this isn't about willpower, it's about your biology.
So let's dive into the science of this, because before we can figure out how to flip the switch off, we really need to understand what that switch even is. And it turns out it's this incredibly sophisticated piece of hardware that we all have built in.
Okay, so this is called your HPA axis. Now that sounds pretty technical, I know, but don't worry about the name. It basically stands for a chain of command in your body. The hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. And its main job is to constantly scan your world and ask one really simple question. Am I safe right now?
You know, the absolute best way to think of your HPA axis is as your body's own internal smoke alarm. When there's a real fire, a real genuine threat, it's a lifesaver for sure. But the problem is, in our modern world, thousands of little things can set it off. A tense email, getting stuck in traffic. That alarm just gets stuck in the on position, and it's constantly flooding our system with stress hormones.
But here's the crucial part. We are not helpless here. Just because that alarm is blaring doesn't mean we just have to let it. We can actually learn to walk over and manually turn it off. We can take back control.
This slide lays out our goal perfectly. Look, on the left, you've got that overactive state. The HPA axis is screaming, threats detected. Your cortisol levels are way up, and these things called predictive loops are wide open. But on the right, that's the reset state. The brain is signaling safety, cortisol drops, and, most importantly, those loops get closed.
And this, honestly, is the most empowering piece of this whole puzzle. Your stress response does not have to be some runaway train. You consciously have the ability to send signals to your brain that everything's okay, that the threat has passed, and that it's safe to stand down.
All right, so how do we actually do this? How do we send that safety signal to the brain? Well, the research points to two really simple but surprisingly powerful habits.
Here it is, your two-step action plan. First, we've got the sensory dimmer, and second is something called cognitive offloading. Just think of these as the manual override switches for your internal stress alarm.
So first up is the sensory dimmer, and it's pretty much what it sounds like. You just intentionally reduce the amount of information that's flooding your senses. You know, dim the lights, maybe put on some noise-canceling headphones, or just close your eyes for 60 seconds. By turning down all that external noise, you're literally telling your internal threat detector, see, it's all good out here, you can relax.
And the second habit, cognitive offloading, is all about tackling the internal noise. This is the simple physical act of getting all those worries out of your head and onto a piece of paper. The moment you write down what's stressing you out, you signal to your brain that the concern has been logged, it's been noted, and it doesn't need to be rehearsed over and over again.
So why are these two simple things so incredibly powerful? I mean, how can they reset such a complex biological system? Well, it all comes down to this really fascinating concept about how our brain deals with uncertainty.
The source material puts it perfectly. The goal is to close predictive loops and allow the brain to power down. That's the key right there. But what in the world are these predictive loops that we need to close?
Okay, the best way to get this is to think of predictive loops like open tabs on your computer's web browser. Every worry, every single unresolved problem, every little what if, that's another tab that's draining your resources. And when you have too many open, your brain's processor slows down, the internal fan starts whirring, and you just feel completely overloaded. That's your HPA axis in overdrive. So the sensory dimmer and cognitive offloading are really just ways to start closing those tabs. You're sending a very clear message to your brain's threat detector, saying, hey, I see the potential problem, it's been noted, it's been contained, you are officially relieved of duty for now. That loop closes, and the system can finally power down. And what's the result of all this? Well, the payoff is remarkably fast. This isn't something that takes weeks to start working. The data actually shows that by practicing these simple habits, you can measurably lower your body's main stress hormone, cortisol, in just a matter of hours.
So the biggest takeaway here is this. You are not at the mercy of your stress response. You have a manual override for that internal smoke alarm. The only question left is, which alarm? Which one of those open loops are you going to decide to close first?